So you just heard all about Charlie and I, and now we're going to get into the meat of what we're talking about. So what we're talking about today, and the reason that I wanted to bring up this quote, is that Stephen Covey talks about the fact that we all have these scripts in our head, what I call stories. And these stories can get stuck in the past, and they can stop working for us, and they can hold us back. And now is a great time. We're in this time of a lot of challenges with COVID and with the climate crisis, to really look at our scripts, look at our stories, and see how we can refresh them, we can reimagine them, and again become what Stephen Covey calls servant leaders. So I know you're all dedicated to becoming the most powerful you can amongst your own tribes and your network, and this movement to create all safe streets for all modes of transportation. So let's take a look at what we can do to make that happen. The thing is that we all see the world through our own lenses, right? And we've got to be aware that we're doing this. And what Stephen Covey calls this is that we have fixed mindsets sometimes, and we've got to look at those mindsets and recognize where we're stuck in order to have a growth mindset and become the most valuable and the most effective at what we want to do. So I'm going to first we're going to do a little exercise. So this is one of the first illustrations that Covey actually has in his book, and you might have seen it before. Charlie and I had both seen it before. And right now, what I want you to do is, in the text box, I want you to share what you see, or actually I'm going to actually ask you to unmute yourself because I can't see the text box when I'm presenting. So does anybody want to shout out right now what they see? Who do they see? Charlie and I both knew this, but we only saw one. Okay, go ahead.
I see an old woman's face.
You see an old woman's face. Okay, anybody else?
Old man.
I'm sorry, Karen, go one more time.
A young woman.
You see a young woman. All right. Anybody else? How many people see a young woman? Raise of hands. Raise of hands. Who sees a young woman? Who sees an old woman? Raise your hands. Okay, so Charlie and I both only saw the young woman here. And so if you see it, you go along the left-hand side, the feather is the top of her hat. Then she's got her hair, her small nose, her cheek, and then she's got the fluffy boa or whatever. But if you look at it and you see an old woman, the pearls around the young woman's neck are the mouth of the elderly woman.
Oh.
And that's what, see? All right, isn't that fascinating? And like I said, we both had seen this before, but both of us could only see the young woman. We could only see the young woman, and we had to go back and read it again and remind ourselves that the older woman was there. So
it might be interesting to, it's a different perspective on how you're seeing.
It's a different perspective. Okay, so we're going to ask you to go back on mute, and we're going to come back to some more exercises in just a few minutes. So now I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, and Charlie is going to be talking about self-awareness. Charlie, over to you.
Okay, good. Let me find where the right place is. All right, I can see you guys now. Good. All right. So how hard could it be to paint a bike lane? I asked Gus Garcia, a city council member and mentor of mine. When I was 32 years old in Austin, Texas, I was executive director of the Texas Bicycle Coalition. And I had been to Europe. I had seen how bike lanes and walking and transit could be part of a healthy environment and condition. I'd been in the Texas legislature. I knew how laws got passed. I knew that if organized voices or organized money was at the table, they usually got their way. And the inverse was true. But I couldn't figure out how hard could it be to paint a bike lane. I'd been doing this for a couple of years, and I saw Gus at the post office. Gus Garcia, he said, "Charlie, you're only going up against the hardest thing there is, and that is the status quo. Nobody, you may have it in your mind what I don't know, Copenhagen looks like, but nobody around here does. Your job is to show me." He was a city council member at the time. You got to show us what's in your head. And he said, that's your job. So I could see that we needed to have a paradigm shift in our thinking about bicycling in Texas. I was executive director of a nonprofit organization, the Texas Bicycle Coalition. By that time, we had about 1,000 members, and we were starting to be effective, but we were really frustrated because it was taking so long. We could see that we needed a paradigm shift. Familiar with what a paradigm shift is?
Yeah.
Right. It's a mindset. We have a mindset here, and that mindset then leads to our habits, and it leads to us being on automatic pilot, oftentimes, and therefore not conscious. Stephen Covey, in his book, one of the foundations of 7 Habits was a realization that we have, among other unique endowments as humans, the ability to self-awareness, the ability to understand that between a stimulus and our response is a moment of time that we have to consider our options. And within that moment of time, unlike other animals that are operating on their instincts or the conditions around them, we have control over that. And it's that space, that ability to decide how we want to respond that was a critical factor. That's a paradigm shift if we can when we realize that. I want to share with you a paradigm shift, how it feels. Are you familiar with this? Let's experience one right here, right now. See my hands? I'm going to put them together just like this. And I want you to do the same thing. Put your hands together with your thumbs up. You familiar with this? Let's call our left hand team A, right hand team B. Our goal in the next 15 seconds is to see how many times we can pin each other. All right? I'm going to put mine down. Ready, set, go. Count. 15 seconds. Stop. How many of you got more than 20? Melissa did. All right, I'll come back to you. Anybody get more than 10? There's a 10. There's a 10. Anybody? And then the rest of you got less than 10, I presume. What was the goal? The goal was to see how many times we could pin each other in 15 seconds. Now, most of us will see that as a competition, and we'll get 5 or less because we'll be trying to win the competition. A couple of you got more than 10 because I noticed that you were cooperating and racking up the scores. Is that right? Just nod. I can't hear you. Just nod, or yeah. The paradigm shift here is the realization that our goal was to see how many times we could pin each other in 15 seconds, not who the winner was going to be. We're conditioned, though, to do competition versus cooperation. I learned that lesson a long time ago in a canoe with my ex-wife Beverly at the Boundary Waters, when after a day and a half of paddling, and I'm in the back and we're going back and forth, and I'm frustrated because this is so hard. I figured out that if I backed away and didn't try to force my way through the strokes, but to match hers, all of a sudden we went straight with less effort. That's when I learned that sometimes cooperation is a smarter strategy than competition. And that's what this paradigm shift conversation is about. And the realization that we have an opportunity to choose how we're going to respond to the stimulus. Now, in Texas at the time, we were treated like second-class citizens as bicyclists and pedestrians, and we still are. However, when I get a chance to talk a little bit later, I'll talk about the Bikes Belong campaign and how all that changed.
Thank you, Charlie. That was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So now what we're going to talk about specifically are 3 of the internal stories that we tell that can either hold us back or they can help us leap forward. So specifically, the 3 types of internal stories I'm going to focus on today are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves in our own head, the stories that we tell others about ourselves, what we're good at, what we're not so good at, and the stories that we tell amongst ourselves for our team, our department, our organization, and even our movement. And how does that trap us and keep us frozen maybe in the past? So perhaps the most challenging of these kinds of stories to change are our own internal stories, because we don't always recognize that our mind is constantly telling us stories. The Buddhists call this the monkey mind. And most of us have a script going 24/7. The problem is that the stories, and most especially the limiting stories, are not in our own voices. And what do I mean by that? The voices that tell us we aren't good enough, that we're not working hard enough, that we don't know how to focus, we don't have the skill set, we don't have the natural talent, whatever it is, those are often in the voices of a parent, of a boss, of a teacher. And so the first thing, like Charlie said, was first we've got to become self-aware that we're running these old negative scripts, and then we've got to recognize whose voice it is, and that's no longer true. That's no longer who we are. We might be stuck in a story from when we were 5, or when we were 10, or when we were a teenager. Even if it was a story from last week, it's already old. It's time for something new. So let me give you an example story of how to overcome an internal story, and how an internal story really hamstrung me at a really fantastic opportunity in my life. So in the September of 2016, I met Alex Doty, who was then the executive director of the League of American Bicyclists, the national bike organization. We are at a food court in Las Vegas at the Mandalay Bay Convention Center, and we're both there at the Interbike Trade Show. We had an intense hour-long conversation about the need for better storytelling and communications to grow bike advocacy, because we can really wonk out as a tribe, can't we? And a week or so later, he invited me to come to the National Bike Summit in March of 2017 and lead a storytelling opening keynote with other women. The first time it had ever been done, and I was very excited about it. And then he also asked me to host a half-day storytelling workshop at the end of the summit. So far, all of that is fantastic, right? I mean, what an opportunity for me, what an opportunity for Pedal 11, what an opportunity for the women that I asked to get up on stage with me. And if you happen to be there, you may remember that it was Barb Chamberlain, the Director of Active Transportation for the state of Washington, Kit Keller, who had been the head of the Association for Biking and Walking Professionals, Timberly Jones, who's active in biking in Atlanta, Maria Bosted from Pocampo, the Bag Line, and Monica Garrison of Black Girls Do Bike. All that's fantastic. But here's where my internal story bogged me down and made me far less effective than I could have been. So to that point in time, one of my internal scripts was that my real value in the world was as a marketer and a promoter. And I thought it was my job to find other people who were more talented than I was and really get them out onto a broader stage, like getting these women up on the stage at the conference. I knew I was a good trainer, but in my heart of hearts, my real skill was as a talent scout. The second thing that was a really limiting internal script was that I had a scarcity mindset. And you know what, I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves right now if they haven't been muted already, because we're getting a little feedback and it'll be bad on the recording. So if you haven't muted yourself already, go ahead and do that. Okay. Because we're getting some background. Yeah, thanks, Charlie. We're getting some background stuff.
Melissa, do you have the capability to mute people yourself?
Yes.
Usually
So I'm going to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to do that if I haven't. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So my scarcity mindset was that when people would ask me to do things that I really was interested in, even if I was already pretty booked up, I'd say automatically, yes, yes. So when the league came back to me and asked me to do a second training, a third training, a fourth training, I kept saying yes. And so the problem with that is that when I got to the bike summit, 3 things happened. The first thing was that I hadn't been able to really get across to the women that this was the opening keynote, right? So the league was calling it a plenary, but Alex had told me it was a keynote. And so somehow nobody recognized, even though I said it, that we were going to be in front of everybody. So we got there and everybody's jaw dropped because it was on the big stage. And I also didn't insist on more than one dress rehearsal. So everybody did great, but we didn't have an overall goal of what we wanted to accomplish at the summit with those keynotes. The second thing is that I didn't spend enough time on my own talk. And I was one of the few people that had to have note cards in my hand when I got up on stage, which was really embarrassing as the person who had spearheaded all of this. I can see some of you nodding in recognition. And the third thing was that because every day I was going home and preparing for the next day, I didn't go to any networking events at all. I think I went to 2 dinners and that was about it. So I missed a fantastic opportunity to promote my own work and peddle love and collaborate more with the women that had been on stage with me. Now, I'm very proud of it. It's still fantastic to go back and look at the recordings of these, but it wasn't as effective as it could have been. And I want to end by talking about a little bit about the fact that even those of us who consider ourselves shy and introverts can be incredibly effective storytellers. And I want to highlight one person about this. So if you had looked at the 5 of us that were getting together to go on stage, you would have seen that one of us was the quietest, and it was Monica Garrison of Black Girls Do Bike. And she wasn't really speaking up very much, but when she got on stage, she was the one that had led an organization, Black Girls Do Bike, to get hundreds of women around the United States biking again. Now it's thousands. So I had found out about Monica in 2016 because I saw people talking about her on Twitter and the amazing things she was doing. And then I read about her in Bicycling Magazine. So I looked up her website and it was really cool. They had all of these great jerseys and all of these beautiful photos and all these fabulous women, but no Monica. Like I knew her name, but there was no Monica. There was no media room with the story from bicycling. So I sent her a note and I said, hey, I do PR and marketing, and where are you? Would you mind if I shared some tips with you about how you can really be front and center in your own story and why it's important? She said, yes. We had a great conversation. And that's when I decided this is a woman that I want to invite to be on the stage at the Bike Summit. Within 24 hours of our conversation, she had put this picture and others up, including a full media room. Since that time, Trek has twice sponsored her summit. They would have done it again, I'm sure, if we were meeting in person. And she's the person that I bet is going to be on the TED Global stage talking about bicycling. So that's a story about stories that hold you back, and that yes, introverts can do this. Now I want to do a little exercise with you, and I want you to take 2 minutes. I'm going to time us. And what I want you to do is I want you to recognize a negative script that you have about yourself personally, or your organization has about itself, or the movement. So 2 minutes right now, just as I had shown you that I had a negative scarcity mindset and said yes to too many things, and that my real purpose was to promote others rather than really focusing on myself. And I'm going to time it right now and go. So just write down one thing that you have a negative script in your head about, that the movement has a negative script about, that really bugs you, or your organization has a negative script about. Just about 1 minute to go. A negative script that you have about yourself, that your organization has about itself, or the movement has about itself. Or if you have time and you're really on fire, write all 3. Thirty seconds to go. Fifteen seconds. Okay, wrap it up. Okay, so Excellent. I saw everybody working very studiously. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to take 2 minutes to flip that script. So you can do one of them or you can do all three of them if you think you're really, really good at it. So remember, or actually what I want to call to attention, even before I got home, I decided never again would I overbook myself that way, and that I was going to dig deeper into storytelling skills and allow myself to flourish. And when I coached other people, one of the number one things I was going to tell them is give yourself enough time to let your presentations, your stories, your communications go to the next level and beyond. So now I'm going to do the same thing again. And whether you want to write one thing or three things, flip a script about yourself internally, or flip a script about your organization, or flip a script about the movement, or all three. And further, what I'm going to ask you to do is later when we get into questions, I'm going to ask a couple of you if you feel brave enough to go ahead and share what you wrote. Okay, so here we go, 2 minutes. You're flipping the script. And if you can't think of what to say, just write exactly the opposite. Even if you don't believe it yet, write exactly the opposite of what you said that negative script was. And I am going to ask some of you to share if you want to, but you don't have to. So be as just like really brave, like really the most, like the thing that you're just like, oh, gosh, this is what I really believe, or this is what I really think, and this is what I just really want to turn around. This is really what I want to turn around. We're flipping the script. We're turning it around. We just have about 45 more seconds to go. We're flipping the script. Fifteen seconds to go, so wrap it up and set it aside, and we're going to come back to it. So if you feel excited about something that you've recognized, I want you to have the courage to share it with us later. And if you don't want to share it publicly, I want you to write me an email. So I'll send you my email after this. Okay, so that's it. We're done with that. Thank you guys all. I saw you all participating, so that was great. All right. So now we're going to talk about external types of stories that get really stuck. And these are the three most powerful leadership stories that you can tell. If you're not telling them yet, you need to learn how to have a story ready to tell about them. And the type of stories that they are called novelty stories, transition stories, and origin stories. So the one I'm going to focus on first is novelty stories. And novelty stories are the stories that paint the picture of the world that we want to see, verbally, visually, with audio, or all three. And it gives people a visceral, emotional experience of what's possible that they might not ever have imagined. So these are two tweets, and they're taken about a day apart. And they're from Zach Klein. And Zach Klein is the CEO of Dwell Magazine, a popular design magazine. He's a co-founder of Vimeo. He lives in San Francisco. He's gotten really excited about creating safer streets. And he had found a story about a neighborhood in Barcelona, Spain, that had decided to do what they call BC bus. I'm mispronouncing it, but beachy bus maybe, or a bike bus. And 5 families started it. And now they have hundreds of children biking, scooting, roller skating to school, and they're thrilled. So this is a novelty story. It's a little video. When you click on it, it shows you all these children, and all of a sudden it shows people, oh my gosh, Streets could be free of cars on the way to school, and children instead could safely, actively get to school on their own volition, the way many of us did as kids, right? And that's totally changed. Now everybody's driving their kids to school. So the power of Twitter, of the social media platforms, is that it is where the journalists are. So Twitter is one of the only social media platforms that is not a mutual follow. So Facebook, you have to be following each other. You can do your group or your organization, but it becomes kind of an echo chamber. Twitter is where you can get things out to a much broader audience. So you see on the left, he had 319 retweets. On the right, he had 8,000 retweets. And it was maybe a day or two between that happened. Now, remember I said that this is the platform where journalists are looking for stories. So on the 22nd, just 2 days later, 3 days later, NPR ran the story. Now, I know that Zach was influential in this because even though I can't show you this in the screenshot, they took his screenshot and shared it in the actual story. So this is really, really powerful. So this is getting an NPR reporter, the NPR platform, to see that open streets for children, safe streets for children, is something they're doing in Spain. And that means that NPR in the United States could do a follow-up story, right? The next kind of story example I want to talk about is transition stories. And these are the stories that you tell when you're in challenging times like we are right now, and you want to demonstrate that you or your organization has been through tough times before, that you had to be light on your feet, you had to be nimble, and you had to learn new ways of being. And so right here, I'm sharing that when I started in bike advocacy about, a decade ago, there were very few organizations that were both about biking and walking. I think the only one that I know about was Transportation Alternatives in New York that was actually all three. And still, there's very few that are all three, but more and more of them are merging. And these are two of the organizations that I know about that are both biking and walking organizations. Another example of a transition story that I tell is how I gave up my car. My car was impounded for parking tickets in 2007. And I decided to give it up as an experiment because I had been to language school at 21 in Florence, Italy, where everybody rides transit. I could ride transit in Long Beach very easily. And I couldn't afford my car because of my health challenges and because of that only working part-time. I'm going to give you a link to the full story because it's 7 minutes and I don't want to go into it right now, but it opens hearts and changes minds in ways that people, that they look at me and they perceive me a particular way. And then I tell them, oh, hey, my car was impounded for parking tickets. And all of a sudden there's a whole other conversation that gets to be started. Because of that, I went into active mobility and I was invited by John Case's wife, then Georgia, and it wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I wouldn't have gone on to a whole new career that's the most fulfilling and satisfying of my life. So I am very grateful for that. So use transition stories to tell people that, hey, we did tough stuff in the past, we can do it again. Now, the third kind of leadership story I want to talk about is called an origin story. And again, in challenging times when people are really frightened about what's going on, you want to tell a story about how you began, how your organization began, how your movement began, only as an idea that was dedicated to certain values and principles. And then it launched and became something. And even though things are really hard right now, you can get through it by going back to those principles, refreshing your story, and coming out swinging. And so I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, and he's going to tell a story called From Bill Bunch to Billions for Bikes. Charlie, over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. So yeah, this is my origin story related to my life beyond 30. I didn't expect to live beyond 30, by the way. I had rheumatic fever when I was a kid. And so I had big plans, and I accelerated my thinking about life because I thought it was going to end at 30. That's how I ended up spending time in Europe as a college student and not postponing the joy and the learning associated with that. That's why I served in the Texas legislature when I was 23 years old, because I wasn't going to wait around. That's why I, as a political science major at the University of Texas, I had read Saul Alinsky, and I had learned about the power of organized money and the power of organized people. And I had used that in my political career, but I was looking for my next gig. I was 30 years old, and I was having lunch with my buddy Bill Bunch, who said, "You know, Charlie, I know you're a bicyclist, but you guys are treated like second-class citizens around here. Why don't you get involved with the Texas Department of Transportation and go? They're going through their sunset review right now, and bicyclists ought to be at the table." I did some research on that, and Bill was right. And so I could see where, from my political background, that if we got our act together as bicyclists, we could have some clout. And so I started barnstorming the state, talking to bike dealers and bike clubs and everybody who would listen to me that rode on two wheels. And we, as a group, nothing big is ever done on an individual basis, but I did get to serve as a catalyst role to put together a statewide organization called the Texas Bicycle Coalition. It was the only organization in Texas where the men shaved their legs and the women didn't, was one of my stories. My other story was, you know what, if we get our political act together, we won't be treated like second-class citizens. We'll have a little respect in this state, and we can actually move our own agenda as opposed to being treated like roadkill around the state capitol and in city councils. So the Texas Bicycle Coalition got its act together. We had 1,000 members when I told you about Gus Garcia, and in 1992. By 1994, we had 2,500 members, and we were respected. We had state senators that were calling on us for counsel, and we were fighting above our weight. Anyway, that got noticed. Bill Wilkinson in Washington ran an organization called Bicycle Federation of America. He had found some foundation money, and he decided to invest that in me to be the Johnny Appleseed of this new model that we had created in Texas. So I went around the country doing weekend training sessions about advocacy and creating sustainable organizations and being the voice of bicycling at the city council and at the state legislature. After a couple of years, we had some 30 organizations that were either already in place. There were a couple that were already out there and functioning, such as the New York City organization, Transportation Alternatives. But most of these were fledgling organizations. And in '96, we came together at a ranch in Wyoming called the Thunderhead Ranch. And there we set up a peer-to-peer training that had a heavy dose of press and media relations, by the way. We recognized that on our own, we weren't that powerful. But if we amplified our voice, and if we created a coalition of others, such as transit people and pedestrians, and we took a more active living perspective, we could be even more powerful. And so those coalitions were created. And in 1996, the transportation bill, the infrastructure bill, was up for renewal. We had achieved a voice in that in 1992 or 1993 when it passed. It was up for renewal. And the highway lobby saw us as poaching on their money. And one of their highest priorities were to get bicyclists and pedestrians out of the highway bill, as it was known at the time. So we put on a campaign. We raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from the bike industry. They recognized that we could put on a pretty savvy inside-outside strategy with the talent that we had in Washington and strategically targeting districts around the country and organizing the voice of bicycling in those districts, the industry, the bike dealers, and the advocates. That was a field campaign where we got the attention of the Wall Street Journal and editorial boards from New York to Seattle and Los Angeles to Denver, where we used we were pretty good at selling the concepts here, and progressive cities were looking to distinguish themselves from backwater cities. And so they were early adopters and they were embracing this. And so we had a track record of success, but we could also show where if we were part of a sustainable funding system out of Washington, that we could create a network of bike facilities around the country and within cities that would be that would be good for everybody. So we happened to win that campaign. It wasn't easy. We had plenty of people who were pushing back on this, and it took 2 years to do it. But as you can see in that photograph, we had learned that if we got our political act together, that the bike industry partnering with bicyclists and the broader coalition of transit and pedestrian advocates, where we could run our own agenda. And we've been doing that now for the most part through the last generation. I've been proud to be a part of that as one of the architects of what we now refer to as the bicycle movement.
So I want to jump in here about this photo, and we found a lot of Charlie's photos, including there was the editorial board of the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Austin American Statesman, and about 7 others came out in support of this campaign. And this is something that we're not using effectively enough right now in active mobility to push back right now with the infrastructure bill and climate change. So I want to point out that way on the left over here is Paul Steely-White. And I recognized him from a photo, and I asked him in an email newsletter. He was the dynamic executive director for many years of Transportation Alternatives. And I asked him, I said, you look like a kid in that photo. How is it you're there? And he's like, oh my God, Melissa, I shouldn't have been there. I was an intern for the International Mountain Biking Association, and I just kind of jumped in the photo, and I'm really embarrassed about it. But the campaign was so inspiring to me that I went home and I changed my major, and I became an active mobility advocate. So you can see that he's right there next to Tim. It's a very dynamic group of people from the bike industry and bike advocacy at the very beginning of it. So now I want to find out if you guys have any questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm also going to ask you guys, remember I had said that if anybody was feeling brave and they wanted to share their, like a script that they recognized was really limiting them, and they wanted to share a script, how they'd flipped it, we can do that as well. So first, does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about today that you're not clear about, that Charlie and I need to clarify? And we will share the recording of this, but I do want to make sure that we dig into anything that we haven't clarified for you.
I have a question. I don't really know. It might be too detailed for what you're doing now. I am a journalist. I know how to pitch stories as a story, but I feel like so much of what you're doing, which is also very valuable and what I want to do more of, is help people tell their stories without having a media placement in mind, because it's 2 different things.
Sure. And so are you talking about you want people to tell stories for like blogs or social media?
Well, like what you did with the woman of the Black cyclist, that's exactly the sort of thing that I sometimes do to people when I see like a missed opportunity. But you're not saying, okay, to get into the New York Times, you need to do this or this. You're just saying, here's how to develop your story.
Right. And so I do teach storytelling 101, and I'm going to have a storytelling 101 class in November. And so basically I teach people how to tell a 2 to 3 minute story. And the reason I do that is that a 2 to 3 minute story works for a council session. It works for a legislative session. It works for a blog. It works for an email newsletter. It works for a media interview. It works for a presentation. And so the foundation of what we do is that, and you and I can have a further conversation about this another time, but basically I teach a simplified hero's journey, to use the hero's journey of transformation. And this presentation isn't so much about that, but in November, we're going to dig into that. And what I learned, because I wasn't a journalist the way you are, I learned that I needed to, I was trying to elevate people through my blog and through pitching them in the media, and I wasn't teaching people. And I realized my network, it was better for me to teach people and then turn them over to people like you to think about how to pitch the stories. So I hope that makes more sense.
Yeah,
Anybody
I mean, yeah, that's enough for
Okay.
now.
Anybody else have a question? Charlie, anything come up for you that you think we need to clarify?
Not anything comes up, nothing offhand.
Okay. All right. Rick, I'm so glad you're here. Rick Holt is here with us today. He's going to be doing trainings with us in the future. Thoughts that things, something we need to clarify?
I like the idea around the flip the script aspect you talk about, because we tend to sell ourselves short a lot of times. So the idea is that you can make a difference in everybody's life if you take time to listen to them and find out what is important to them. And you know, that media story, Diane, you're talking about is so interesting, and that you know, if we're going to try to put an article out there versus trying to make an impact in somebody's life one-on-one or as a group or something like that, finding out what they need and listening to them. So I'm a big motivational listener kind of person. So I think in these stories we're talking about, and what Charlie's talked about too, and Melissa, is, you know, a lot of what we need to do is find out what other people need, because a lot of times we think about our perception of what we need, and we need to flip that a little bit too, and approach it that direction probably.
Stay tuned, because I have talent scouted Rick to do some trainings with me in December. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so now I'm going to ask, and I'm looking at Robin and I'm looking at Karen, and I'm thinking, you guys look like you could share a story of a script that you want to flip or you just saw how you could flip. So who wants to go first?
I guess I got the unmute button first.
All right, Robin, go for it.
I think this one's a pretty common one. I'm a biologist. I'm not a particularly big biker. And so I have a little storyline that I'm kind of a faker. I don't really know what I'm talking about, and I'm not very articulate about it, like in public. So I'm a little daunted by, you know, getting out there and then getting into like debate situations with people who don't agree. So that's want me to say the.
Okay, so I have my reasons of why you're so crucial. So first I want to tell you the reasons why you're so crucial, because you're the majority of the public, right? I hadn't been on a bike in 30 years, and it took Charlie 6 months to get me on a bike again. And I didn't think I could ride anywhere useful because of dealing with health challenges. In fact, I don't ride a bike right now because it's too hilly where I am, and our closest town is 5 miles away, and I'm not quite ready to do that even on an electric bike yet. So you are the voice of Rick's nodding his head. You're the voice who really needs to step forward, and it's okay to be unsure, and that can be part of your story. So now tell us, did you think of some ways to flip that script a little bit?
I thought that I could flip it by just saying that, like talking to myself about that my story is authentic and I can just be myself, and that I know enough. I don't have to be a traffic engineer, that I know enough about what it feels like to bike somewhere. I guess I thought of the first time I went to city council right after I moved here. One of the things they just I was thanking them for a bike lane up a hill. It happens to go to my house, so I was super happy about it, because I got here and it wasn't there, and it was terrifying. And I just talked about how slow I was as a biker, because I'm really slow. I ride a really heavy bike. And so I just talked about that. And I guess I kind of went back to that and thought everybody laughed and thought that was like, they could appreciate that, I guess.
Totally. That was a huge win. And I would say, so, and Charlie teaches the theory of thirds, and we talk about lay down, stretch, and visionary goals. And so you got that out to a city council. Fantastic. Now, where else could you work on that story in a way that you felt really happy about it? And if you haven't already done it, could you do an op-ed? And could you do, yeah, right? Right?
Yeah.
So Karen, I'm going to switch over to you to make sure we have time. But thank you, Robin. That was fantastic. I love it. Robin, Karen, excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, you know, of course, the reason I'm here is to learn how to be a more effective speaker. So my negative is that I'm not an effective speaker. I have been involved in bicycle advocacy for many years. not seeing a lot of fruit from the labor, because it's hard on the other side of the organizations I've been involved with have been reluctant. People are more into, the people I am now involved with are much more interested in cycling than talking about cycling and advocating it. So we have a club that is a 501(c)(3) status that's supposed to be educational, promotion, encouragement. But everyone just wants to ride their bike. And I actually I'm falling into that category myself. So my negative is, though, how I'm not being very effective, because I want to encourage people to get involved and make a difference. But that's why I came to this, was that I want to learn more effective techniques and how to make a story more interesting to a lot more people.
So I think that the bridge here is like, you want the Robins of the world and the me's of the world to be involved and let them see a place for themselves. So Rick would say, listen to find a place for themselves, because that is one of the big things about bicycling advocacy. Is it for the people who already ride, about the joy of bicycling and the athleticism, or is it to get more people riding? And the whole 10 years I've been involved, that's been a challenge. It's gotten more welcoming. It's not less about people in Lycra. They used to have a lot of things that were about, we don't drop anyone, it's only a 20-mile ride. And I'm like, well, what if you can't ride a mile? So what I would say is connecting with people like Robin and saying, what are your concerns? And you, Karen, could say, well, I'm a novice, or I'm a mediocre, because you are with people in Charlie and Beyond's category of what they can do in a day and the kinds of hills. But we need to have the baby step. And I'll tell you a funny story about, we had a very successful, sorry, what's the name of the streets, the Bixby Knolls, the streets program for kids? Kittical Mass. So we had a fantastic Kittical Mass in Bixby Knolls in John's neighborhood in North Long Beach. And the very first one, they had hundreds of people show up. And we talked to the organizers afterwards, and they're like, it was great, but it was really funny. We had all this like fanfare and balloons and all this stuff for the beginning. And a bunch of families left right after the beginning. And we're like, what are you doing? Wait, come back. We're going on the ride now. It's only 5 miles. They're like, no, it was all we could do to get everybody on their bicycles with their helmets down the street 2 blocks. So that's good for today. We'll see you next month. And so that's where you have to see if, like, okay, who in our network can tell us the story of why they don't want to join us, and where can we build a bridge to them? And then how can I tell the story better? And I'll teach you how to tell the story better in November, if you want to come and do that.
Can I add one thing in response to that? That's a common story of people not just wanting to ride their bikes, yet they believe in what the advocacy opportunity is. And so those are usually the guys that have disposable income and are quite happy to help fund somebody else to do that sort of thing. And so to have a big hairy goal about, I don't know, teaching every kid in town how to ride a bike, or something else about promoting the sport and or the transportation options is a way to one, achieve a big hairy goal, and two, to engage people indirectly and to have them part of something bigger than themselves on something that is not a laydown. If we're going to do this, we need to raise, I don't know, $3,000, and we need to hire 4 people to go do this summer camp where we get all these kids through a transportation class and how to move around. Are you in Chico? I see the sign behind you.
I was in Chico, but now I'm in bicycling Mecca, Eugene, Oregon.
Well, okay. Same story. You have a lot of people there that just want to ride their bikes. I got that. But they also care about the mission so creating big hairy goals is a way to do that.
Well, I just want to say too, and not to take up too much time, but we just applied to a grant from Cycle Oregon to for money to research the history of cycling in Eugene, to tell the story. We are thinking this would engage and elevate Eugene to be not only track town, but cycle town. And that would help bring in money for bicycling infrastructure.
Last I heard, cycling was part of the DNA, and
So I have to tell you, Karen, that we happen to have one of the preeminent bicycle historians in the country, Jay Townley, on the call. So I want to make sure that
Can we connect?
that Jay and Karen exchange emails at the end of this in just a few minutes to connect about that, because I'm sure Jay has some thoughts. He always has some marvelous resources and ideas about the history of bicycling. So is there anybody's questions? Anybody have a question that's come up since then? Anybody a thought that anybody else want to share a negative script that they had, a negative script that they flipped?
Oh, this is John Case. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just a couple things. With the Eugene making that, go after the Nike guy, the head of Nike. Big company, dude. I would say, because I've done a fair bit of advocacy over the years, I think one of the key things is when you're dealing with people that might not see your point of view, it's not us versus them, but what you're trying to do complements all the good things that they're trying to do. Promoting biking, whatever, complements whatever they're doing and makes collectively a better thing, instead of using them as the enemy, but making them feel acknowledging whatever they're doing.
show them what's in it for them.
What?
Show them what's in it for them.
Yeah, that it makes them more progressive and them more, and you're doing whatever they're doing. You're doing great things. And what we're doing just complements what you're doing. And get that Nike guy to.
He just spent a bunch of money on a stadium.
He still has more.
No,
Charlie can probably talk about this, but in Covey, he also talks about trying to find out what their person's goals are so you get closer to them. Is that the sort of Japanese way of trying to figure out how you can align your goals in a way? Because the closer we can get to the other person and where they are, the more likely you are for success in that win-win we're looking for.
Well said. I learned that from Covey, but I also learned it from Peter Lagerwey, who said, if you want me to understand your point of view, first understand mine. And brilliant, just brilliant.
So I want to let you guys know that John Case and his wife founded Bike Station in Long Beach, California, many years ago. It was the first public bike parking facility in the United States. They had to have tremendous patience to work with the city of Long Beach to make it happen. It was and is a fantastic item. So John is a great ideator. He comes up with really fresh, innovative ways of thinking about stuff. So it's really exciting to have him here. So what I'd like everybody to do, because we're at 11 o'clock right now, is if you want to be in touch with anybody, if you want people to be in touch with you, go ahead and put your email here, and then people can be in touch with you and kind of let people know, maybe with just a few words, what you're interested in. Do you want to have somebody to collaborate with to be a better storyteller? Do you want to learn how to pitch stories to the media? Whatever it is, you want to learn about the history of bicycling and how that can work, listening. So I want to let you know that we will be teaching, I will be teaching a free storytelling class, a storytelling 101 on, I think it's November 10th, and that'll come out in my email newsletter, and I'll share that with everybody. Then stay tuned in December. We're going to have something with Rick. We haven't decided yet, but we will have a big thing about listening. Diane, you had your finger up about something.
Yeah, I know the time is up, but when I was looking at the points that were in what we were going to learn, it talked about identify and illuminate your own personal power, demonstrate your personal power through servant-based leadership, sustain your power. And
yeah, you know,
have we really talked about that?
You're right. You're right to like call us on that, because we put that up.
I mean, that's kind of why I signed up.
We put that up in the very beginning. You're right to call us on it. And basically it's through storytelling. So you are powerful when you stop your negative scripts, your internal scripts and your external scripts. So recognizing where what you're doing right now is holding you back. That could be that I'm so right. I know I'm right. And you're not able to connect. That's whether you're pitching a story to, let's say you're used to working with the Los Angeles Times, but you want to be in the Atlantic, right?
I'm not
I'm
not
just
a
using an
yeah.
example, Diane.
Yeah.
I'm just using an example. So owning your personal power is about having your story be fresh and new and engaging. And then you expand that power as a servant leader by being in today. So Charlie could stick with being the founder of the Texas Bicycle Coalition, being the field director of the Bikes Belong campaign, and he could live there. And then that could be all that he ever did. I could stay, oh my gosh, I got to go to the National Bike Summit and tell the first storytelling plenary, and I messed up by being the only one that had notes, and I could stay there. And there would I be. I flipped my script and became a servant leader when I recognized my job isn't to promote Black Girls Do Bike to the media. My job is to check in with Monica Garrison and say, do you have every skill that I'm learning that you need to be the most dynamic when you get on stage, to be the most dynamic when you get in front of the camera? And so that's where I check in with her. That's where she is a fan of my email newsletter. And I can see how many times people open stuff. I can track, I know exactly who's engaged. So you're right that we didn't do that, but really this is all coming down to what's the story you're telling yourself as a servant leader, and are you effective now? And here's what I'm going to say on ending on this. We're not right now. And Rick and I are talking deeply about this. We're not effective right now in creating safer streets, and we're not effective right now in climate change. We are an organized force. For those in biking and walking, we've done tremendous things, but we get bogged down because a lot of us are engineers and a lot of us are politicians. And so we see everything through the lens of the infrastructure that has to be created, and we see everything through the lens of the policy that has to be created. And we forget that we have to bring the public right where they are. Toxic car culture, everything's about me, everything's about convenience, and we've got to flip those scripts. And so what I will share with you all in my follow-up email with the recording of this are some people that are flip scripting. And one of those is a gentleman out of Canada named Tom Flood, who is an advertising executive who used to work in the car industry. He is now an active advocate for his kids and others to safe bicycle. And he's teaching people how to use advertising, think in 15 seconds, in 30 seconds, in a minute, which is just not the way we work in bike advocacy, to create short, pithy, visual, fabulous, emotionally engaging, celebratory, and how dare you car culture stories that are getting not hundreds of retweets, thousands. And so imagine if we were fabulous storytellers in every place, getting thousands and thousands of retweets and shares on YouTube, other places for this. That's servant leadership that goes out to the rest of it. Did I answer that pretty well?
Yeah, I do. What do you define as servant leadership? Is it, I mean, yes, servant-based leadership.
Charlie, you want to take this, or you want to knock it over to Rick and show him that he knows this stuff too? Charlie, what do you think?
Rick probably has it also, but the in Covey's construct, it's as a leader, recruiting people to participate and then supporting them in being successful, and and amplifying their efforts, because if they win, you win. And the inverse is not about control, it's about success on the goal. And I'm happy to, if Rick or someone else wants to build on that, but that's the point.
Okay, no, that's great. I wasn't sure. That's helpful.
And I want to tell you a story to end on this, and I'm really glad that you called me out on that, Diane, because I meant to go back and circle back to that, and I didn't. So thank you. So 2 days ago, a young woman in Oregon, here in Eastern Washington, wrote a tweet, and she called out a news director for shaming a young person who had either been really harmed or killed in a crosswalk, and blaming, I don't know if he said she didn't have a helmet on, whatever. She said, how dare you victim blame? And so I looked up this gentleman. He's a news director of a TV station, and he considers himself in his Twitter profile a servant leader. And I thought to myself, I'm going to talk to Rick and Charlie about this, because that means he's reading Covey. Two things. It means he's reading Covey, and he could very likely consider himself to be a devout Christian. Now, we have possible allyship with people who really consider themselves to be people of faith. when we really call them to look at what their real ethics and purpose are. They are just as seduced with car culture and speed and road rage as the rest of us. But there is a path there, and in the past they've done some good things about ecology and the climate change, but we need to do a better job of that than we're doing right now. Final thoughts, guys? We're 7 minutes over and I don't want to keep you. I know you're all really busy. Charlie, final thoughts?
Thanks for including me. I'm good.
Thank you.
Everybody good? Did everybody get their questions answered?
Thank you.
Fantastic. As soon as I get the recording all done up, I will send everything probably sometime within tomorrow with some follow-ups and some things I want you to take a look at. And thank you, Diane, everybody. Thank you for excellent questions and a great conversation. I hope you found this of value.
Thanks, Melissa. I enjoy your newsletter a lot, your emails.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And keep
Great
that
job.
slow roll going, Robin, on the bike. That's fine. That's perfect.
I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes if people want to double check and make sure they got emails or they shared their emails, and then we'll close it up.
Got a great story for you, Robin. On my brother-in-law wanted to take me on the Gap Trail from Pittsburgh to DC, and so he bike commutes 23 miles every day each way, and he's got a bike trail, so it's all great. But then he bikes at 16 miles an hour, and so I had to tell him, we're on the trail, it's in nature, we're going to start out slow and go slower. We're not going to go this fast. Sorry.
It's awesome.
You got to be able to see what's going on around you, right? So, you know,